So you're covering both of us, right?
Wait, I didn't even know you were coming. This was supposed to be just me and her.
Yeah, I didn't tell him.
So, nah, I'm not paying for either of y'all.
Wow.
Hard times rarely announce themselves with sirens. They arrive quietly, through patterns people want to ignore, through behaviors that feel uncomfortable to talk about, and through consequences no one wants to take responsibility for. What we are witnessing right now is not just a dating trend, not just social media noise, and not just a temporary phase. It is a deeper shift in behavior, incentives, and survival strategies, and by the end of this video, you will understand why so many men have chosen to disengage entirely, and why this moment may be irreversible if nothing changes. Before we get into it, make sure you like the video, share it, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell, and select all if you want more great Angry Guy content and want every single video the moment we release it. That support makes a real difference, and it ensures you never miss what is coming next. Also, if you are serious about protecting and safeguarding your assets and growing your wealth in unstable times, make sure you check out Angry's Crypto Academy. Inside the academy, you will learn how to buy, sell, and trade crypto responsibly, how to protect yourself from financial risk, and how to think long-term instead of emotionally. The academy is linked in the description of this video, so go check it out now while you are thinking about it. And if you are enjoying these Angry Guy videos and want to show direct support, you can always buy me a Red Bull using the link in the description. That support keeps this channel independent and focused on telling the truth without filters. Now let's talk about what is actually happening. A recent study revealed something that would have sounded unbelievable just a few years ago. Roughly 1/3 of women surveyed openly admitted that they are going on dates with men not because of interest, connection, or long-term intent, but specifically for free food. No romance, no attraction, no intention of building anything, just consumption. That alone would already signal a serious problem in dating culture, but it does not stop there. We are now seeing documented cases where dates escalate into confrontations when a man refuses to pay, where friends are brought along without disclosure, and where public shaming is attempted through recording and uploading clips online. This behavior is not about love, partnership, or even dating anymore. It is about extraction. It is about entitlement colliding with economic pressure. And it is about what happens when social norms collapse faster than people are willing to admit. Platforms like TikTok amplify these moments not because they are healthy, but because outrage spreads faster than reflection. What should be private moments become public performances. What should be uncomfortable conversations turn into content. And the result is not empowerment. The result is distrust. This is not about generalizing all women. That point matters, and it must be said clearly. This is about patterns that men are experiencing at scale. This is about incentives that reward bad behavior while punishing restraint. And this is about an economy that has quietly pushed people into desperation while telling them everything is fine. For years, men were told that their role was obsolete. They were told they were unnecessary, problematic, or harmful by default. Masculinity itself was framed as something to be corrected instead of understood. Men were instructed to step back, to stop approaching, to stop speaking, to stop leading, and to stop asserting boundaries. Many listened, they adjusted, they withdrew. And now society is shocked that they stayed gone. Decades of messaging did not simply criticize bad behavior. It labeled men as a class. Terms were invented not to solve problems, but to shame ordinary actions. Normal social behaviors were reframed as threats. Institutions that once promised fairness became tools of leverage. Men learned, often the hard way, that participation carried risk without reward. Public spaces became hostile. Workplaces became legal minefields. Dating became a transaction where the man bore all cost and all liability while being told he was lucky just to be present. Social media accelerated everything. A phone camera became a weapon. Context disappeared. Nuance vanished. Reputation became fragile. Silence became safer. Men adapted the only way that made sense. They reduced exposure, they minimized risk, they stopped explaining themselves, they stopped chasing validation from systems that clearly did not value them. They learned that being alone is not the same thing as being lonely. And for the first time in decades, many found peace in that distinction. What we are seeing now is not men abandoning society out of bitterness, it is men opting out because the cost benefit calculation no longer makes sense. When effort is punished, when generosity is exploited, and when boundaries are mocked, disengagement becomes rational. At the same time, many women are encountering reality without a buffer for the first time. For generations, men absorbed the pressure. Men paid the bills. Men smoothed the consequences. Men filled the gaps between idealism and reality. That safety net is fraying, and without it, panic is setting in. You can see it in the language online. You can see it in the demands. You can see it in the sudden insistence that men return, re engage, and resume roles they were told they were not allowed to have. But trust does not reset on command. Respect cannot be demanded after being dismissed for decades. Men are no longer responding to words, they are responding to patterns. They are trusting what they can observe over what they are told. And what they observe is chaos, contradiction, and a refusal to take accountability. So men are choosing something else. They are choosing simplicity. They are choosing control over their time, their money, and their energy. They are choosing peace over performance, minimalism over obligation, self respect over approval. And this is why so many men now live quieter lives that are paradoxically more comfortable. Without the constant drain of expectation, without the pressure to prove worth through spending or sacrifice, life becomes manageable again. Needs shrink, stress decreases, clarity returns. Meanwhile, many women are discovering that independence without support structures is far harder than slogans suggested. The cost of living does not care about ideology. Rent does not respond to affirmation. Groceries do not accept validation as currency. And when survival pressure rises, behavior changes. This is not cruelty, it is economics, it is cause and effect. Men did not disappear overnight. They were pushed, criticized, regulated, and shamed out of participation over decades. Now the absence is noticeable and the consequences are unavoidable. Dating apps are quieter, approaches are rarer, free attention has dried up, financial generosity has boundaries, and the men who left are not angry. That is the part many misunderstand. They are calm, they are focused, they are done arguing. This is what walking away actually looks like, not rage, not revenge, just refusal to play a game that is clearly rigged. As society becomes more unstable, this divide will only widen. Men are conserving energy, women are demanding intervention, institutions are confused, and no one wants to admit that this outcome was predictable. The question is not whether things have changed, they already have. The real question is whether accountability will ever replace blame and whether trust can be rebuilt once observable reality has burned away comforting narratives. Think about what you are seeing. Think about the incentives being rewarded. Think about the silence where participation used to be. This is not a phase. This is a correction. And corrections are rarely gentle. And when men began stepping back, many assumed it was temporary. A pause, a reaction, something that would reverse itself once conditions improved. But that assumption misunderstands what actually changed. This was not a mood shift, it was a recalibration. Men did not leave because they were upset, they left because they learned. For a long time, men were told that if they just adapted a little more, listened a little harder, and gave a little extra, everything would balance out. If they became softer, quieter, more accommodating, they would be rewarded with acceptance and stability. What actually happened was the opposite. The more men gave, the more was demanded. The more they compromised, the more boundaries were crossed. Eventually, many men reached a simple conclusion. There was no finish line. Dating stopped feeling like a mutual process and started feeling like an evaluation where the outcome was already decided. Men were expected to invest time, money, emotional labor, and attention up front while being told that expectations in return were inappropriate. The message was consistent: give more, expect less, be grateful for the opportunity to participate. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. Over time, men noticed that effort did not correlate with outcomes. Generosity did not lead to appreciation. Sacrifice did not lead to loyalty. And compliance did not lead to peace. That realization is what broke the cycle. Not anger, not bitterness, awareness. Once awareness sets in, behavior changes quickly. Men stopped chasing situations that felt asymmetrical. They stopped justifying unfair dynamics. They stopped explaining why they deserved basic respect. They simply opted out. What replaced that space was not emptiness, but structure. Men began organizing their lives around predictability instead of chaos. They focused on work that rewarded output instead of intention. They invested in hobbies that returned satisfaction instead of stress. They built routines that reduced noise instead of amplifying it. Solitude became a tool rather than a punishment. Without constant external pressure, many men rediscovered how little they actually need to be content. A stable income, a quiet home, physical health, mental clarity, purposeful work. Everything else became optional. This is where the narrative breaks down for those who expected men to suffer after disengaging. Instead of collapse, many men experienced relief. Financial strain decreased without the expectation to subsidize others. Emotional volatility disappeared without constant conflict. Decision-making improved without social pressure to conform. Meanwhile, the systems that relied on male participation continued operating as if nothing had changed. Dating culture still assumed men would initiate. Social norms still assumed men would pay. Public discourse still assumed men would absorb blame. But fewer men were present to fulfill those roles. This mismatch created friction. Women entering dating spaces began encountering resistance instead of pursuit. Men asked questions instead of offering. Men set limits instead of apologizing. And when those limits were challenged, men walked away without argument. The result has been confusion. For years, men were told to leave women alone, and now they are being criticized for doing exactly that. Men were told their presence was unwanted, and now their absence is being labeled a problem. These contradictions are not subtle. Men see them clearly. This is why appeals to empathy no longer work. Empathy was already extended. It was not reciprocated. Now men are operating on observable reality, not emotional appeals. And observable reality tells them that engagement carries more downside than upside. Economic pressure has intensified this shift. Rising costs have forced everyone to prioritize survival over ideology. When resources become scarce, inefficiencies are eliminated. Men are cutting out relationships and expectations that drain value without providing stability in return. This has exposed a difficult truth. Independence rhetoric was built on an assumption that systems would continue to function as they always had. That assumption was wrong. Independence without infrastructure is fragile. Autonomy without accountability is unstable. As men withdrew, the safety net they quietly provided began to disappear. Not because men owed it, but because they had been filling gaps no one acknowledged. Emotional buffering, financial smoothing, physical protection, practical problem solving. These contributions were invisible until they stopped. Now, Many women are encountering friction they have never experienced directly. Negotiation without leverage, bills without assistance, dating without default generosity. And in response, frustration is rising. That frustration is not directed inward, it is projected outward. Men are blamed for leaving. Men are accused of selfishness for prioritizing themselves. Men are framed as the problem for refusing to resume roles they were told were unnecessary. But blame does not restore participation, it accelerates disengagement. Men are not motivated by guilt anymore. Guilt was used for decades. It lost its effectiveness. Today, men are motivated by peace, by efficiency, by results. Like this is why you see men choosing smaller homes, fewer obligations, simpler routines, not because they cannot handle complexity, but because complexity no longer offers a return. Luxury is no longer defined by status, it is defined by calm. A man who controls his time, his finances, and his environment lives better than a man chasing approval. That realization has spread quietly through observation rather than persuasion. At the same time, social media continues to distort perception. Highlight reels replace reality. Performance replaces honesty. Public shaming becomes entertainment, and every viral clip reinforces the idea that vulnerability is dangerous. Men see this and respond rationally. They stop sharing, they stop engaging, they stop explaining. Silence becomes safety. This silence is often misinterpreted as apathy. It is not, it is discernment. Men are choosing where their energy goes, and increasingly, it is not going into unpredictable social dynamics. What we are witnessing is not the collapse of relationships, but the collapse of unrealistic expectations. Relationships that cannot survive fairness were never stable to begin with. The long term consequences of this shift are significant. Fewer relationships and fewer families, fewer shared responsibilities, but also fewer conflicts, well, fewer resentments, on fewer power struggles. Society is not prepared for this trade off because it was built on assumptions that no longer hold. It assumed men would always compensate for instability. It assumed men would always show up regardless of treatment. It assumed men would always adapt. Those assumptions are now obsolete. Men walking away is not a movement fueled by slogans. It is an outcome driven by incentives. Change the incentives and behavior will change. Ignore them and disengagement will deepen. This is not about punishment, it is about alignment. People participate where participation makes sense. They leave when it does not. For many men, modern dating, modern social expectations, and modern narratives simply do not make sense anymore. The cost is clear. The benefit is uncertain. The risk is high. The reward is minimal. So they choose differently. They choose to invest in themselves, to build skill sets that translate directly into stability, to focus on health, discipline, and purpose, to form friendships that are reciprocal, to remove themselves from environments that thrive on conflict. This choice is not dramatic. It is quiet. It does not trend. It does not need validation. And that is precisely why it is effective. As more men follow this path, the gap between expectation and reality will continue to widen. Institutions will struggle to adjust. Narratives will become more aggressive. Pressure campaigns will intensify. But pressure does not rebuild trust. Accountability does. There is an honest reckoning with how men were treated, why they left, and what would actually make participation worthwhile, again, nothing will change. Men are not asking to be chased. They are not asking to be praised. They are asking for fairness, consistency, and respect. Without those, silence remains the better option. And silence, once chosen, is difficult to undo. One of the most misunderstood aspects of what is happening right now is the assumption that men are withdrawing out of spite. That assumption is comforting to those who do not want to confront cause and effect. If men are framed as angry or resentful, then their choices can be dismissed as emotional rather than rational. But what we are seeing is not emotional withdrawal, it is strategic withdrawal. Men are not confused about what they are doing. They are not waiting to be convinced. They are not hoping for permission to return. They have assessed the environment and made decisions based on risk, reward, and sustainability. That is not bitterness. That is adaptation. For decades, men were told that self sacrifice was virtuous, that compromise was maturity, and that endurance was strength. Those values were not wrong in isolation. The problem was asymmetry. The expectation of sacrifice flowed in one direction. The expectation of accountability did not. Over time, men noticed that boundaries were interpreted as hostility, standards were framed as insecurity, preferences were labeled as control. The message was consistent. Men were allowed to give, but not to choose, allowed to provide, but not to evaluate, allowed to support, but not to expect. That environment trained men to do something very specific. It trained them to disengage quietly. You do not walk away loudly from a system that punishes dissent. You simply stop participating. You stop offering. You stop volunteering explanations. You stop correcting narratives that cannot be corrected. You let outcomes speak. This is why so many men now appear invisible in public discourse. They are no longer trying to be understood, they are prioritizing being undisturbed. This shift becomes especially clear when you look at how men now structure their daily lives. Many have reduced their expenses deliberately, not because they cannot earn more, but because they no longer see the value in chasing lifestyles built around external validation. Smaller living spaces, fewer possessions, lower fixed costs. These choices increase resilience and reduce dependency. With fewer financial obligations tied to social performance, men gain leverage over their own time. Time that would have been spent navigating conflict, expectation, or negotiation is now invested in skill building, physical health, creative pursuits, or simply rest. Rest itself has become a form of resistance in a culture that demands constant output without gratitude. Men are also redefining success. Success is no longer measured by how much one can provide for others at the expense of oneself. It is measured by stability, autonomy, and peace. A man who sleeps well, trains regularly, pays his bills, and enjoys quiet evenings is no longer viewed by other men as lacking ambition. He is viewed as having figured something out. This is a cultural shift that does not require coordination. It spreads through observation. One man notices another is calmer, healthier, less stressed. He asked why. The answer is simple: fewer obligations, clear boundaries, no unnecessary conflict. Meanwhile, many women are experiencing a growing disconnect between expectations and outcomes. They were told they could have everything simultaneously without trade offs: career priority without relational cost, autonomy without responsibility, choice without consequence. That promise was never realistic. When economic pressure increases, trade offs become unavoidable. Someone must absorb the cost. When men step back, that cost no longer disappears, it becomes visible. This is why there is increasing frustration expressed online. Not because men left suddenly, but because their absence is now being felt in concrete ways. Fewer invitations, fewer safety nets, fewer people stepping in to smooth over problems. Instead of asking why men no longer volunteer for those roles, many narratives default to moral framing. Men are labeled as selfish for choosing themselves. Men are accused of abandoning society. But those accusations ignore a fundamental truth. Participation must be voluntary to be sustainable. You cannot shame people into caring indefinitely. You cannot threaten people into generosity. You cannot guilt people into sacrifice once they have realized the system is not reciprocal. Men understand this intuitively. They have applied it to their own lives. They no longer invest where returns are consistently negative. This does not mean men have stopped caring entirely. It means they are selective. They invest in friendships that are mutual. They support causes that demonstrate integrity. They help individuals who show appreciation rather than entitlement. What they avoid are environments that thrive on instability, accusation, and constant renegotiation of rules. Dating for many men has become one of those environments, not because relationships are undesirable, but because modern dating norms often punish honesty and reward performance. Men are expected to present certainty without vulnerability, generosity without expectation, and confidence without boundaries. Those contradictions make sustainable connection nearly impossible. Rather than struggle within that framework, many men have chosen to step outside of it entirely. The result is not chaos for men, it is simplification. Without constant emotional turbulence, men experience improved mental health. Anxiety decreases, focus improves, motivation becomes internal rather than reactive. This internal orientation is critical. Men are no longer motivated by approval, they are motivated by alignment. Does this situation improve my life or complicate it? Does this interaction add value or create stress? Does this commitment support my long term goals or undermine them? When the answer is negative, men disengage without apology. This behavior is often misinterpreted as coldness. It is not, it is efficiency. Emotional energy is finite. Men are choosing to spend it where it yields stability rather than chaos. As this mindset spreads, it reshapes male social circles. Men bond over shared discipline rather than shared complaints. Conversations focus on growth, not grievance. Support is offered quietly, without spectacle. This stands in contrast to online discourse, which thrives on outrage and escalation. The quieter reality rarely trends, but it persists. Institutions are struggling to respond because they were built on assumptions of constant male participation. Workplaces assume unlimited availability. Social systems assume male compliance. Cultural narratives assume male adaptability. Those assumptions are failing. Men are not rebelling loudly, they are simply no longer absorbing inefficiencies. And systems that rely on unpaid emotional labor, financial subsidization, or silent endurance are starting to feel the strain. This does not mean collapse is imminent. It means recalibration is inevitable. The question is whether that recalibration will be honest or coercive. Will accountability replace accusation? Will fairness replace rhetoric? Will mutual respect replace one sided expectation? If not, disengagement will deepen. Men are not asking to dominate, they are asking not to be disposable. They are not demanding control, they are demanding consistency. Until those conditions exist, walking away remains the most rational choice. This is why attempts to lure men back through nostalgia will fail. Romanticized visions of partnership mean nothing without structural change. Words about connection ring hollow when patterns remain unchanged. Men trust patterns now, not promises. They observe behavior over time. They watch how boundaries are treated. They note whether accountability is shared or shifted. They decide accordingly. This observational mindset makes reversal difficult. Once trust is replaced by pattern recognition, persuasion loses power. And that brings us to the most uncomfortable realization for many. Men are not waiting to be convinced, they are already content. Contentment is the most dangerous state for systems built on dissatisfaction. A man who is content cannot be manipulated easily. He cannot be pressured through fear of loss. He cannot be coerced through shame. He simply does not need what is being offered. This is why the shift feels sudden to those who were not paying attention. It was gradual. It just reached a tipping point. As economic conditions continue to tighten, this divide will become clearer. Men with low overhead and high autonomy will remain stable. Those dependent on external validation or subsidized support will struggle. This is not moral judgment, it is outcome. As this disengagement continues, something deeper is becoming visible beneath the surface. What men are actually rejecting is not companionship, not intimacy, and not cooperation. They are rejecting instability disguised as empowerment. They are rejecting systems that demand contribution without reciprocity. And most importantly, they are rejecting the idea that they must participate in dynamics that consistently work against them. For years, men were told that discomfort was growth and that dissatisfaction was a personal failure. If a relationship felt draining, the man needed to communicate better. If expectations felt unfair, the man needed to compromise more. If outcomes were consistently negative, the man was told to look inward rather than question the structure itself. That framing worked only as long as men believed the structure was fundamentally sound. Once that belief collapsed, the entire narrative lost credibility. Men began asking questions they were previously discouraged from asking. Why is responsibility expected without authority? Why is sacrifice expected without appreciation? Why are men held accountable for outcomes they do not control? Why are men told to invest endlessly in environments that penalize them for asserting boundaries? Those questions did not receive honest answers. They received deflection. They received moral framing. They received accusations of insecurity or entitlement. That response told men everything they needed to know. Rather than argue, men adjusted. This adjustment did not happen through mass coordination. It happened individually, quietly. One man deciding not to pursue a date, another choosing not to engage in a discussion he knows will go nowhere, another opting out of a social obligation that offers no return. Over time, these individual decisions added up. The cumulative effect is what we are seeing now. A noticeable absence of male initiative in areas where it was once taken for granted. Less chasing, less rescuing, less smoothing over problems that others created. This absence has created anxiety because it exposes how dependent certain systems were on male participation. Not dominance, participation. Without it, friction increases. Consider how many social norms assume men would absorb cost without complaint, paying for dates, providing transportation, offering protection, being emotionally available while suppressing their own needs. These expectations were rarely acknowledged as labor. They were treated as default behavior. When defaults disappear, confusion follows. Many women are now encountering resistance where compliance once existed, not aggression, resistance, a simple refusal to continue operating under outdated assumptions. And because resistance has been framed as hostility for so long, it feels shocking. But refusal is not hostility, it is choice. Men are choosing to disengage from situations that no longer make sense. They are not trying to punish anyone and they are trying to preserve themselves. This preservation instinct becomes stronger under economic pressure. When margins shrink, inefficiencies matter more. Emotional inefficiency becomes unsustainable. Financial inefficiency becomes dangerous. Time inefficiency becomes unacceptable. Men are responding rationally to these constraints. One of the clearest indicators of this shift is how men now talk about relationships among themselves. The language has changed. It is no longer about conquest, validation, or status. It is about risk management, about peace, about whether a situation improves or degrades quality of life. This pragmatic framing removes fantasy from the equation. Relationships are evaluated like any other long term commitment. Does this add stability? Does this increase stress? Does this align with my values? Does this respect my boundaries? If the answer is no, the decision is simple. This clarity is uncomfortable for those who relied on ambiguity. Ambiguity allowed expectations to remain unspoken. It allowed standards to shift. It allowed accountability to be avoided. Clarity eliminates those advantages. As men become clearer, negotiations become more difficult. There is less room to maneuver, less room to guilt, less room to reframe outcomes after the fact. This is why some narratives are becoming more aggressive. When persuasion fails, pressure increases. When pressure fails, blame intensifies. But none of that addresses the root issue. The root issue is trust. Trust was eroded over time through repeated experiences of imbalance, through watching standards change midstream, through seeing bad behavior excused while good behavior was taken for granted, through being told one thing while experiencing another. Once trust is gone, systems become transactional by necessity. Men stop assuming goodwill. They require proof. They stop offering benefit of the doubt. They observe first. This observational stance is not romantic, but it is protective. It prevents emotional investment from preceding evidence. It prevents commitment from preceding consistency. For many men, this is the first time they have operated this way in relationships, and the results have been stabilizing. Without rushing into emotional entanglement, men maintain clarity. Without immediate obligation, men retain autonomy. Without pressure to perform, men remain authentic. Ironically, this makes genuine connection more likely, not less. But genuine connection requires mutual respect, and that is not always present. Where respect exists, men are willing to engage. Where it does not, they are content to remain alone. This contentment is frequently misunderstood. Solitude is framed as failure because dependency has been normalized. But solitude, when chosen, is strength. It allows reflection, it allows recalibration, it allows men to reconnect with themselves without constant external noise. Many men are discovering that their best ideas, their healthiest routines, and their strongest sense of purpose emerge in quiet environments, without distraction, without expectation, without performance. This rediscovery of self is one of the most significant outcomes of men walking away. It is not just about avoiding harm, it is about reclaiming agency. Agency was gradually eroded through messaging that framed men as problems to be managed rather than individuals to be respected. Reclaiming agency requires stepping out of environments that deny it. That step is rarely dramatic. It looks like declining invitations, canceling accounts, reducing exposure, simplifying life, saying no without explanation. Over time, these small acts compound into a fundamentally different way of living. Men who live this way are less reactive, less anxious, less dependent on external validation. They are harder to provoke and harder to manipulate. This has consequences beyond dating. It affects workplaces, communities, and institutions. Men who value peace will not tolerate unnecessary bureaucracy. Men who value autonomy will resist micromanagement. Men who value clarity will disengage from performative culture. This creates friction in systems that rely on compliance rather than alignment. As participation decreases, institutions may attempt to compensate through incentives or penalties. But incentives must be meaningful and penalties must be enforceable. In many cases, neither applies. You cannot incentivize someone who already has what they want. You cannot penalize someone who has reduced their dependency. This is why walking away is such a powerful position. It removes leverage from systems that assumed it. The long-term implications of this are profound. Fewer marriages, fewer children, more individualized living, more fragmented communities, but also fewer abusive dynamics, fewer forced compromises, fewer people trapped in unsustainable arrangements. This is not a perfect outcome. It is a trade-off. Stability for some, discomfort for others, peace for individuals, uncertainty for systems. The question society must confront is whether it wants participation or compliance. Participation requires respect. Compliance requires pressure. Only one of those is sustainable. Men have made their choice. They are choosing environments that respect them. They are choosing interactions that are reciprocal. They are choosing lives that prioritize peace over approval. Those choices are not reversible through messaging. They can only be influenced through change. Change requires honesty. It requires acknowledging how men were treated. It requires recognizing that walking away was not spontaneous, it was learned. Until that reckoning happens, disengagement will continue. As pressure increases on systems that once relied on male participation, a predictable response begins to emerge. Instead of addressing root causes, many institutions and voices attempt to reframe the issue as a communication failure. Men are told they need to talk more, open up more, explain themselves better, and re engage emotionally. This framing sounds reasonable on the surface, but it ignores a critical detail. Men already communicated. They communicated through feedback, through behavior, and ultimately through withdrawal. Withdrawal is communication. It is the final form of it. When people stop showing up, stop responding, and stop participating, they are sending a message that words can no longer carry. That message is simple. The environment is no longer viable. Men did not leave silently because they had nothing to say. They left because everything they said was either dismissed or used against them. This is why attempts to reopen dialogue without structural change feel hollow. Men are not interested in conversations that lead nowhere. They are not interested in being heard only to be ignored. They are interested in outcomes. And until outcomes change, engagement remains optional. What many fail to understand is that disengagement is not passive. It requires discipline. It requires resisting pressure. It requires walking away from familiar patterns, even when those patterns are socially rewarded. Men who disengage are not drifting, they are choosing. This choice becomes clearer when you examine how men now evaluate risk. In the past, risk was romanticized. Taking chances was encouraged. Sacrifice was praised. Today, risk is measured. Emotional exposure is evaluated. Financial commitments are scrutinized. Long-term implications are considered before action is taken. This shift toward caution is not fear-based. It is experience-based. Men learned that optimism without evidence leads to loss. They learned that assuming good intentions does not guarantee good outcomes. They learned that boundaries are not optional if stability is the goal. As a result, men have become more selective about where they invest themselves. Selectivity is often mistaken for avoidance, but it is not the same. Avoidance is driven by fear. Selectivity is driven by clarity. Clarity comes from pattern recognition. Men observe what happens consistently, not what is promised occasionally. They watch how people behave under stress, not how they speak when conditions are ideal. They note whether accountability is taken or shifted. Over time, these observations form reliable predictions. When predictions suggest instability, men step back. This is why public appeals to return to old norms are ineffective. Those norms were not neutral. They carried hidden costs that men absorbed quietly. Once those costs became visible, nostalgia lost its appeal. You cannot ask people to return to a structure that harmed them without first addressing the harm. Another misunderstanding is the belief that men will eventually re-engage out of necessity. That financial pressure, loneliness, or social expectation will push them back. This assumption underestimates how adaptable men have become. Men have adjusted their lives to reduce dependency. They have lowered expenses, increased flexibility, and diversified sources of meaning. Social fulfillment is no longer tied to a single pathway. Friendship, purpose, and satisfaction are no longer exclusively routed through romantic relationships. This diversification reduces vulnerability. When one area becomes unstable, others compensate. That resilience makes coercion ineffective. Attempts to shame men for prioritizing themselves reveal a deeper discomfort. They expose how much was taken for granted. When men were present, their contributions were minimized. When men left, their absence became a crisis. This contradiction is not lost on men. Rather than respond defensively, many men have chosen to disengage further. Silence in this context is not submission, it is insulation. Insulation protects against volatility. It reduces emotional temperature. It prevents external chaos from infiltrating internal stability. Men who prioritize insulation are not trying to win arguments, they are trying to live well. This orientation changes how men define fulfillment. Fulfillment becomes internal rather than relational. It comes from mastery, progress, and alignment rather than approval or validation. A man who measures success internally is difficult to control externally. His self worth is not contingent on praise. His identity is not dependent on roles others assign him. This independence is unsettling to systems that rely on dependency. When people no longer need approval, leverage disappears. That loss of leverage explains much of the anxiety surrounding the shift. When participation cannot be assumed, it must be earned. When compliance cannot be enforced, respect becomes necessary. Respect, however, requires humility. It requires acknowledging past mistakes. It requires admitting that certain dynamics were unsustainable. That admission is difficult for systems invested in preserving their narratives. So instead, pressure increases. Men are told they are abandoning responsibility. They are warned of future regret. They are reminded of social expectations. These tactics rely on fear of isolation. But isolation no longer carries the same weight. Men have learned that solitude can be restorative, that peace is preferable to constant negotiation. That quiet competence is more satisfying than performative success. This is not a universal experience, but it is increasingly common. And because it spreads through observation rather than advocacy, it is difficult to counter. Men see other men thriving quietly. They see reduced stress, improved health, financial stability, and a sense of control. They compare that to their own experiences under previous norms. The contrast is stark. Choice becomes obvious. This does not mean all men will walk away permanently. It means engagement will be conditional. It will require reciprocity. It will require consistency. It will require environments that do not penalize honesty or boundaries. Until those conditions exist, disengagement remains the default. Economic realities reinforce this trend. When costs rise, inefficiencies are eliminated. When time becomes scarce, priorities sharpen. Men are optimizing their lives for sustainability, not spectacle. This optimization includes emotional efficiency. Men are avoiding cycles of conflict that consume energy without resolution. They are stepping away from debates that produce more heat than clarity. They are choosing environments that reward effort rather than punish it. This pragmatic approach has spillover effects. Workplaces with unreasonable expectations see higher male disengagement. Social spaces that thrive on confrontation lose participation. Institutions that rely on guilt rather than value struggle to retain contributors. These are not moral judgments, they are outcomes. As more men align their lives with these principles, a parallel culture emerges, a culture of restraint, discipline, and intentionality. It does not seek attention. It does not require validation. It exists quietly alongside louder narratives. This quiet culture is resilient. It adapts without protest. It persists without permission. And because it is grounded in lived experience rather than ideology, it is difficult to dismantle. The future trajectory of the shift depends on one thing: whether accountability replaces accusation. If systems continue to externalize blame, disengagement will deepen. If respect replaces expectation, Participation may return in limited, meaningful ways. Men are not opposed to cooperation, they are opposed to exploitation. They are not against relationships. They are against instability. They are not rejecting society. They are rejecting dynamics that undermine their well being. Understanding this distinction is critical. Without it, conversations will continue to miss the point. Solutions will target symptoms instead of causes, and frustration will escalate on all sides. But if honesty enters the equation, if past treatment is acknowledged, if reciprocity becomes standard rather than exceptional, re engagement becomes possible, not guaranteed, possible. Until then, men will continue to choose peace. They will continue to build lives that require less justification. They will continue to prioritize stability over approval. This is not a rebellion, it is a realignment, and realignments do not reverse easily. As this realignment deepens, something else becomes clear that many people are not prepared to acknowledge. Men did not just walk away from dating or relationships, they walked away from narratives that required them to deny their own lived experience. That shift is more profound than it appears on the surface, because once a person stops outsourcing reality to ideology, it becomes almost impossible to pull them back into it. For a long time, men were encouraged to distrust their instincts. If something felt wrong, they were told they were overreacting. If a situation felt unfair, they were told to be patient. If a pattern repeated itself, they were told to give it more time. Over and over, men were taught to override pattern recognition in favor of optimism. That training only works until the cost becomes too high. Eventually, men began trusting what they could see rather than what they were told. They noticed how often accountability flowed in one direction. They noticed how quickly standards shifted when responsibility came into play. They noticed how frequently men were expected to self correct, while others were encouraged to self justify. That awareness changed everything. Once men began trusting observable reality, decision making simplified, confusion faded, doubt diminished. The endless internal debates about whether they were being unreasonable stopped. If a situation consistently produced stress, instability, or loss, the answer became obvious. Disengagement was not framed as failure. It was framed as competence. Competence is knowing when to stop investing in something that does not work. It is knowing when effort no longer improves outcomes. It is knowing when walking away preserves more than staying ever could. This reframing is critical because it removes shame from the equation. Men are no longer viewing withdrawal as giving up. They see it as choosing wisely. And that mindset spreads quickly because it delivers immediate results: reduced stress, clearer thinking, improved focus, better health, more control over time and money. These outcomes are tangible. They reinforce the decision to disengage. At the same time, attempts to reframe male withdrawal as a crisis of masculinity are falling flat. Men are not confused about who they are. In many ways, they are more grounded than they have been in years. Without constant pressure to perform roles that feel misaligned, identity stabilizes. Men begin defining themselves by what they build rather than what they provide to others. Skill replaces approval. Discipline replaces validation. Consistency replaces performance. This internal orientation makes men far less susceptible to external pressure. Narratives lose power when they no longer align with experience. Labels lose impact when they no longer threaten identity. That is why outrage driven messaging no longer resonates. Men are not reacting emotionally because they are no longer emotionally invested in systems that do not respect them. This detachment is often mistaken for apathy, but it is closer to neutrality. Men are not trying to oppose or dismantle anything. They are simply choosing not to participate. That choice is profoundly destabilizing to systems built on assumption that men will show up, assumption that men will absorb cost, assumption that men will tolerate inconsistency. When those assumptions fail, friction increases. One of the most telling indicators of the shift is how men now respond to conflict. In the past, conflict invited engagement, debate, defense, explanation. Now, conflict often invites disengagement, silence, distance, exit. This is not because men cannot handle disagreement. It is because they have learned that certain conflicts are not designed to be resolved. They are designed to extract energy. Walking away from those dynamics is not avoidance, it is boundary enforcement. As more men adopt this posture, social environments change. Spaces that thrive on provocation lose participants. Conversations that rely on emotional escalation lose audience. What remains are quieter, more stable interactions. This quiet is unsettling for those who equate attention with importance. When attention disappears, insecurity rises. That insecurity often manifests as blame. Men are accused of lacking empathy, lacking commitment, lacking courage. But these accusations do not land the way they once did. Men hear them, evaluate them against lived experience, and move on. What matters now is alignment, not approval. Alignment means living in a way that does not require constant justification. It means choosing commitments that support long term stability rather than short term validation. It means structuring life to reduce exposure to unnecessary conflict. Men who live this way are not immune to difficulty. Life still presents challenges, but those challenges are cleaner. They are practical rather than emotional. They can be solved rather than negotiated endlessly. This is another reason disengagement has been so appealing. It replaces social chaos with solvable problems. A leaking pipe can be fixed, a budget can be adjusted, a schedule can be optimized. Endless emotional volatility cannot. Men are choosing problems with solutions. This choice has ripple effects across society. Fewer men are willing to act as shock absorbers for dysfunction. Fewer men are willing to mediate disputes that are not theirs to solve. Fewer men are willing to subsidize instability with their time, energy, or resources. This does not make men hostile, it makes them selective. Selectivity is often misunderstood because it disrupts entitlement. When access is no longer guaranteed, expectations must adjust. That adjustment is uncomfortable. But discomfort is not injustice, it is adaptation. As adaptation continues, new norms begin to form. Norms where consent applies to obligation, norms where effort is reciprocal, norms where respect is mutual. These norms are not enforced through slogans, they are enforced through participation or the lack of it. If an environment respects boundaries, men engage. If it does not, they leave. This simple rule is reshaping behavior faster than any campaign ever could. Economic pressure accelerates this process. As margins tighten, inefficiencies become intolerable. Men are prioritizing survival, sustainability, and sanity. Anything that threatens those priorities is reevaluated. This reevaluation extends to long held beliefs. Beliefs about what success looks like, beliefs about what fulfillment requires, beliefs about what men owe the world. Many of those beliefs are being discarded. Men are realizing they do not owe unlimited access to their labor, money, or emotional bandwidth. They owe responsibility to themselves first. Without that foundation, nothing else is stable. This realization is not selfish, it is foundational. A person who cannot maintain their own stability cannot reliably support others. Men learned this lesson the hard way. Now they are applying it consistently. This is why appeals framed around obligation fail. Men are no longer motivated by abstract duty, they are motivated by concrete outcomes. Does this choice improve my life? Does it preserve my peace? Does it align with my values? If the answer is no, the choice is simple. This simplicity is the quiet revolution most people are missing. It does not announce itself. It does not protest. It does not demand recognition. It just works. As this mindset spreads, resistance will increase. Systems do not relinquish leverage willingly. Narratives will intensify. Pressure will escalate. Moral framing will sharpen. But none of that changes the underlying calculus. Men are no longer willing to trade peace for participation. That decision, once made, rarely reverses. At the end of all of this, what remains is not anger, not resentment, and not a desire for conflict. What remains is clarity. Clarity about incentives, clarity about consequences, clarity about what works and what does not. Men did not wake up one day and decide to abandon society. They adjusted to reality the same way people always have when systems stop functioning as promised. The story many want to tell is that men changed suddenly. The truth is that men adapted slowly, patiently, and quietly. They listened, they complied, they absorbed pressure, they made adjustments, they waited for balance, and when balance never came, they stopped waiting. What we are seeing now is not rebellion, it is withdrawal from dysfunction. For years, men were told that the future would be better if they just endured the present. That if they accepted criticism, accepted blame, accepted instability, and accepted diminishing returns, everything would eventually stabilize. That promise failed. Not because men failed, but because the system offering it was unsustainable. Once that became obvious, staying no longer made sense. Men walking away is not about winning or losing. It is about refusing to keep playing a game where the rules change, the costs increase, and accountability is optional. It is about choosing environments that reward effort instead of punishing it. This choice has reshaped how men view relationships, work, community, and purpose. Many men now understand that not every problem is theirs to solve. Not every conflict deserves engagement, and not every expectation is reasonable. That understanding has been liberating. Liberation, in this context, does not mean excess or indulgence. It means restraint. It means discipline. It means simplicity. Men are discovering that a simpler life often delivers more satisfaction than a complicated one built around external approval. Fewer commitments, fewer obligations, fewer emotional entanglements, more control, more peace. This is why attempts to shame men back into participation consistently fail. Shame relies on shared values. Once values shift, shame loses its leverage. Men no longer measure success by how much they are willing to sacrifice for systems that do not respect them. They measure success by stability, health, and autonomy. This does not mean men are hostile to connection. It means connection must now meet a standard. It must be reciprocal. It must be consistent. It must add value rather than extract it. Anything less is no longer worth the cost. This standardization of expectations is one of the most important changes underway. It introduces accountability where ambiguity once reigned. It forces clarity where confusion once benefited certain dynamics. And clarity, while uncomfortable, is healthy. As society adjusts to this new reality, there will be resistance, there will be denial, there will be attempts to revert to old narratives, but narratives cannot override incentives indefinitely. People respond to outcomes, not slogans. If participation is punished, people leave. If peace is threatened, people withdraw. If effort is taken for granted, people stop offering it. These are not moral statements, they are observable patterns. The men who have walked away are not asking for apologies. They are not demanding validation. They are simply living differently. And that difference is enough to expose how fragile certain assumptions always were. The assumption that men would always show up, the assumption that men would always provide, the assumption that men would always adapt regardless of treatment. Those assumptions no longer hold. What replaces them is conditional participation. Engagement based on respect rather than expectation, contribution based on alignment rather than obligation. This model is quieter. It is slower. It is less dramatic. But it is also more sustainable. In this model, relationships that survive will be stronger because they are chosen, not defaulted into. Communities that endure will be more resilient because participation is voluntary, not coerced. Workplaces that thrive will be more efficient because effort is rewarded, not exploited. This is not a collapse, it is a sorting. People are moving toward environments that match their values and away from those that do not. Men are simply further along in that process because the cost of staying became unbearable sooner. As economic pressure continues to rise, this sorting will accelerate. Systems that rely on assumption will struggle. Systems that reward reciprocity will adapt. The future is not guaranteed to be comfortable, but it will be clearer. Men will continue to choose peace over performance, stability over chaos, reality over narrative, and once those choices are made, they are rarely undone. The question is no longer whether men will return to old roles. The question is whether new structures will emerge that make participation worthwhile again. That depends entirely on whether accountability replaces blame and whether respect replaces entitlement. Until then, walking away remains the rational response. This is not about hatred, it is about self preservation. It is not about rejecting others. It is about reclaiming oneself. Men learned that they could build satisfying lives without constant negotiation, without endless compromise, and without sacrificing their well being for approval. That lesson, once learned, does not fade. It becomes the foundation for everything that follows. As you look at the world around you, pay attention to what is actually happening, not what you are told is happening. Watch where effort flows, watch where silence grows, watch where participation declines. Those patterns tell the real story. And now I want to hear from you. What did you think about what was discussed in this video? Do you agree with it? Have you seen similar patterns in your own life or in the lives of people around you? Leave a comment and share your thoughts because this conversation matters. Like the video if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.